The great chamber of the Galactic Assembly was filled to capacity for the first time in decades. Representatives from hundreds of species had gathered to witness what many were calling the most unusual diplomatic confrontation in recent memory. A minor species with barely 30 years of assembly membership was standing against one of the most powerful blocs in the galaxy. And they were doing it not for profit or territory, but for 47 refugees from a dying race. Ambassador Diane Crawford walked to the center of the chamber and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The human fleet was visible through the transparent dome overhead. 347 ships floating in silent testimony to what her people were willing to sacrifice for their principles. The representative of humanity may present her case, the presiding judge announced. Diane took a deep breath and began. Honored members of this assembly, I come before you today to contest the Lorthy claim on the Cathari refugees. I have evidence that this claim is based on falsified records and fraudulent documentation. A murmur ran through the chamber. Zelos rose from his seat, his yellow eyes blazing with anger. This is outrageous. The Lorthy hegemony does not submit false documents to this assembly, and yet that is exactly what has happened, Diane replied calmly. She activated the display system and began presenting the evidence that Councillor Preth had uncovered, combined with the historical records that Vethsora and Dr. Park had compiled. Point by point, she demonstrated how the original debt documents had been altered centuries ago to extend a claim that should have been settled generations in the past. Zelos tried to interrupt several times, but the presiding judge demanded order. The evidence was clear and compelling, and species that had been inclined to support the Lorthy began to shift in their seats uncomfortably. When Diane finished her presentation, Councillor Preth rose to speak. I have conducted my own independent investigation of these records, Preth said. I can confirm that the documents submitted by the Lorthy hegemony contain significant alterations that were made approximately 300 years ago. The original debt was paid in full through Cathari labor and service. The current claim has no legitimate basis. The chamber erupted in chaos. Zelos demanded a recess. Other species demanded an immediate vote. The presiding judge called for order again and again until finally the noise died down. We will hear from the Lorthy representative, the judge announced. Zelos stood. But for the first time since the proceedings began, he seemed uncertain. These allegations are baseless attacks on Lorthy honor. We demand. You demand nothing, Diane interrupted. She stepped forward, and her voice rang out across the chamber with a strength that surprised even herself. For too long, the Lorthy have used their power to bully smaller species into submission. For too long, they have manipulated records and twisted laws to serve their greed. But today, it stops. Today, humanity stands with the Cathari, and we will not be moved. She gestured toward the transparent dome and the fleet hovering outside. 347 ships. Thousands of humans who travel across the galaxy to be here. Not soldiers, not warriors, just ordinary people who believe that kindness matters, who believe that when someone helps you in your darkest hour, you remember. You remember, and when the time comes, you pay it forward. The chamber was silent. Even Zelos had no response. Diane turned to address the wider assembly. I know that many of you find this confusing. Humans are young and weak by galactic standards. We have no great fleets, no vast empires, no ancient wisdom. But we have something that many elder species seem to have forgotten. We have gratitude. We have loyalty. We have the capacity to remember kindness and to repay it with interest. She paused, letting her words sink in. 60 years ago, a Cathari vessel found a human colony ship lost and dying in deep space. They had no reason to help. Humans had nothing to offer them. But they helped anyway, because it was the right thing to do. They saved 3,000 lives and asked nothing in return. Today, we are here to honor that gift. Today, we show the galaxy that humans never forget those who helped them. The presiding judge called for the vote. One by one, the species of the assembly registered their positions. The Larathi claim was rejected by an overwhelming margin. The Cathari were granted protected status under a new human-Cathari alliance, and any future claims against them would be considered acts of aggression against humanity itself. Zella stormed out of the chamber without a word. His defeat was complete, and he knew at dawn in the hours that followed, something unexpected began to happen. Representatives from other species approached Ambassador Crawford, one after another. They were smaller species, Mire powers who had spent centuries being pushed around by the likes of the Larathi. They wanted to know if humanity would remember kindness shown to them as well. Diane answered each one the same way. Help us when we need it, and we will never forget. Stand with us, and we will stand with you. That is the human way. Back on Port Meadow, the news arrived like a sunrise after a long and terrible night. Governor Santos announced the victory to the colony, and the celebration that followed lasted for 3 days. Humans and Cathari danced together in the streets, sharing food and music and stories. Children played games that combined both cultures, inventing new rules as they went along. Vethsora found Captain Laura Bennett sitting alone at the edge of the celebration, watching the joy with quiet satisfaction. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, his old bones creaking with the effort. I have lived for over 100 years, he said. I have seen the rise and fall of empires. I have watched my own people dwindle from billions to thousands. I thought I had seen everything the galaxy had to offer, but I had never seen anything like what your people did today. Laura smiled softly. We just did what was right. No, Vethsora said firmly. You did what was extraordinary. There is no profit in what you did. No strategic advantage. No rational explanation that the elder species can understand. You simply decided that the Cathari were worth protecting, and you convinced an entire civilization to stand with you. Do you understand how remarkable that is? Laura thought about her grandmother again. She thought about all the nights spent listening to stories of the horizon and the Cathari ship that had appeared like a miracle in the darkness. She thought about how those stories had shaped her, had made her into the person she was today. My grandmother used to say that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats the powerful, but how it treats those who have nothing to offer in return, Laura said. She learned that lesson from your people. She taught it to me. And today, humanity proved that we were paying attention. Vethsora was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. The Cathari have been given a second chance. We will not waste it. We will rebuild. We will share our knowledge freely with humanity. And we will never forget what you have done for us. For as long as our species survives, we will carry the memory of human kindness in our hearts. In the months that followed, the Cathari refugees found their permanent home on New Kansas, the agricultural world that had been struggling with crop blight when this story began. The blight was cured using ancient Cathari farming techniques that Vethsora had preserved in his memory. The humans in Cathari worked side by side, planting fields and building homes, and creating a future that neither species could have achieved alone. Silith grew up among human children, learning their ways while teaching them her own. She became a bridge between two cultures, helping them understand each other better. Years later, she would become the first Cathari ambassador to humanity, dedicating her life to strengthening the alliance that had saved her people. The human fleet dispersed and returned to their homes across the stars. But the story of what they had done spread even farther. Other species heard the tale and wondered if perhaps the young humans were onto something. Perhaps gratitude was not weakness. Perhaps kindness was not naivety. Perhaps the galaxy had lost something important along the way, and humanity was here to remind them what it was. On the anniversary of the Assembly vote, a small ceremony was held on Port Meadow. Laura Bennett and Veth Sora stood together. Before a simple memorial that honored both the crew of the original Cathari rescue ship and the human fleet that had come to pay forward their kindness. What do you think the future holds? Laura asked. Veth Sora looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. I think the galaxy is changing. I think your people have started something that cannot be stopped. You have reminded the universe that kindness has power, that gratitude can move worlds. That memory is the greatest gift one species can give another. He turned to look at her with his large, dark eyes. And I think that as long as humans never forget those who helped them, the galaxy will never be quite the same again. Laura smiled and raised her glass to the stars. To kindness remembered, she said. To kindness repaid, Veth Sora replied. And somewhere out in the vastness of space, aboard ships and stations and colonies scattered across 1,000 worlds, humans were telling their children a new story. A story about a dying species that had once helped a lost colony ship. A story about gratitude that echoed through generations. A story about ordinary people. The message from Governor Santos spread across human space like fire through dry grass. It reached the mining colonies in the asteroid belts and the farming worlds on the frontier. It found its way to the crowded cities of the inner systems and the lonely outposts at the edge of explored space. Everywhere it went, it asked the same simple question. They helped us when we were nothing. Now they need us. What kind of people do we want to be? The answer came back in a chorus of voices that grew louder with each passing day. On the industrial world of Forge, factory workers voted to donate a portion of their wages to the refugee fund. On the agricultural planet of Green Haven, farmers loaded their cargo ships with food and medicine and set course for Consensus Prime. On the space station, called Liberty, children collected toys and books to send to the Cathari children who had lost everything. Captain Laura Bennett received orders to join the gathering fleet. The Wanderer was just one small cargo ship among hundreds, but Laura did not care about size or importance. She cared about being there when it mattered. How many ships now? Danny asked as they approached the rendezvous point. Laura checked the latest count. 312 confirmed. Another 50 on the way. All for 47 refugees? All for the principle of the thing, Laura corrected him. This is not just about the Cathari anymore. This is about showing the galaxy who we are and what we stand for. The fleet gathered in the shadow of a gas giant. Far from the busy shipping lanes, but close enough to Consensus Prime to make the journey in a few hours. It was an unlikely armada. There were cargo haulers and passenger transports, mining vessels and colony ships, research craft and private yachts. Not a single warship among them. They had not come to fight. They had come to witness. On Consensus Prime, High Arbiter Zelos received reports of the gathering fleet and grew increasingly uneasy. The Lorathi were used to dealing with threats through force and intimidation. An enemy fleet would have been simple to understand, but this was something new, and Zelos did not know how to respond to it. What are they planning? He demanded of his advisors. This makes no strategic sense. They are sacrificing their economic standing for a handful of refugees. They must want something. Perhaps they simply want to help the Cathari, one advisor suggested hesitantly. Zelos dismissed this with a wave of his clawed hand. No one acts without self-interest. There must be an angle we are missing. But there was no angle. There was only the simple truth that humans had decided the Cathari were worth protecting, and they were willing to pay a price to prove it. Councillor Preth had been following the situation with growing interest. The neutral observer had lived for many centuries and had seen countless diplomatic disputes play out in the halls of the assembly. Most of them were about power and profit and the endless jockeying for advantage that defined galactic politics. But this was different. This was about something older and simpler, something that many of the elder species had forgotten existed. Preth began investigating the original debt records that they, Larthy, had submitted as evidence. It did not take long to find the first discrepancy. The signatures on certain documents did not match the historical records. The dates on others were impossible, given the events they supposedly documented. Someone had altered the records centuries ago to support a claim that should have been settled generations in the past. On Port Meadow, Dr. Kevin Park worked with Veth Sora to prepare a complete historical account of the true relationship between the Cathari and the Larthy. The elder's memory was remarkable, filled with details that matched independent records from neutral sources. Together, they built a case that proved the Cathari debt had been paid in full over 200 years ago. Will this be enough? Kevin asked as they finished compiling the evidence. Vethsora looked at the young doctor with tired eyes. In a just galaxy, it would be more than enough. But the Larthy have power, and power often matters more than truth. Not this time, Kevin said firmly. Not if we have anything to say about it. Scylla spent her days learning about human culture from the children of Port Meadow. She learned their games and their songs and their strange customs. She discovered that humans touched each other casually and frequently, a habit that would have been considered deeply inappropriate among the Cathari. She found that they laughed easily and cried openly, expressing emotions that her people had been taught to hide. One afternoon, Amy took Scylla to visit the colony's small museum, where artifacts from Earth were displayed in glass cases. There were photographs of blue oceans and green forests, of mountains covered in snow and deserts painted in shades of red and gold. This was your home world? Scylla asked, staring at a photograph of a sunset over a vast ocean. It was, Amy said. We had to leave it behind a long time ago. But we brought the memories with us. It looks beautiful. It was. My grandmother used to tell me stories about it. She said the sunsets, there were the most beautiful things in the universe. I never got to see one, but I believe her. Scylla thought about her own lost homeworld, destroyed in wars that had ended before she was born. She thought about the stories her elders told of green hills and crystal rivers, of the Solari flowers that bloomed in fields of gold. Those memories were all her people had left, and now the Larthy wanted to take even those away. Why do humans keep the memories of your old world? Scylla asked. Because they remind us where we came from, Amy said. And they help us remember who we want to be. The human fleet arrived at Consensus Prime on the 30th day after the Larthy claim was filed. 347 ships emerged from faster than light, traveled and took up positions in orbit around the massive station. They did not threaten. They did not demand. They simply waited. Ambassador Crawford stood at her office window and watched the ships arrive. Each one carried humans who had volunteered to make this journey, who had left their jobs and their families to stand in solidarity with people they had never met. Some of them had traveled for weeks to be here. Some had spent their life savings on fuel and supplies. None of them expected anything in return. A message came through from the Larthy delegation requesting an explanation. Crawford smiled as she composed a reply. The people of humanity have come to pay a debt, she wrote. 60 years ago, the Cathari showed kindness to humans in need. We have not forgotten. We will never forget. And we will stand with them for as long as it takes. Zealous received this message and felt something he had not experienced in a very long time. It was not fear exactly, but something close to it. The Larthy understood conquest and domination. They understood the language of power and the calculus of self-interest. But this? This was beyond their comprehension. "They are bluffing," Zealous told his advisors. "They must be bluffing. No one sacrifices this much for strangers." But as he looked at the fleet hanging in space outside his window, he began to realize that maybe, just maybe, humans were not bluffing at all. On the Wanderer, Larva received a message from Vethsora. The old Cathari had been watching the fleet arrive from the surface of Port Meadow, and his words were thick with emotion. "Captain Bennett, I do not have the language to express what this means to my people. For so long, we believed we were alone in the galaxy. We believed that no one cared whether we lived or died. You have shown us that we were wrong. Whatever happens now, we will never forget this moment. The Cathari will carry the memory of human kindness for as long as our species survives." Larva wiped tears from her eyes as she read the message. She thought about her grandmother and the colony ship, Horizon, and the Cathari vessel that had appeared out of nowhere to save them. She thought about all the generations that had passed since then, all the stories told and retold around dinner tables and before bedtime. She thought about how a single act of kindness could echo through the centuries, growing stronger with each retelling until it became something powerful enough to move worlds. "Get some rest," she told Danny. "Tomorrow we go before the assembly. Tomorrow we finish this." The Galactic Assembly met on a massive space station called Consensus Prime, a structure so large that it had its own weather patterns and artificial oceans. Thousands of species sent representatives here to debate laws and settle disputes and carve up the galaxy according to their interests. Humanity had been a member for only 30 years. A newcomer in a chamber, full of ancient powers who had been playing political games for millennia. Ambassador Diane Crawford was humanity's voice in this vast arena. She was 58 years old, with sharp gray eyes and a mind that could cut through nonsense like a knife through paper. She had spent her entire adult life learning the rules of galactic diplomacy, and she was very good at her job. But even she felt small when she stood in the great chamber and looked up at the towering representatives of species that had mastered star travel while humans were still learning to make fire. The Larathi hegemony occupied a place of honor near the center of the chamber. They were a reptilian species with scaled skin and cold yellow eyes, and they had ruled over a significant portion of the galaxy for the past 1,000 years. When High Arbiter Zealous spoke, everyone listened. "The matter before this assembly is simple," Zealous said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber with the confidence of absolute power. "The Cathari owe the Larathi hegemony a debt that dates back 400 years. During the Great Famine of their homeworld, we provided them with resources that saved millions of lives. In exchange, they agreed to terms of service that would pass to their descendants until the debt was repaid. It has not been repaid. Therefore, all surviving Cathari belong to us by galactic law." Diane stepped forward to speak. She felt the weight of countless alien eyes upon her, most of them dismissive, some curious, a few openly hostile. "The Assembly recognizes the representative of humanity," the presiding judge announced. "Thank you," Diane said. "I wish to contest the Larathi claim on several grounds. First, the Cathari survivors currently under human protection fled from violence. They are refugees, not property. Second, the debt the Larathi cite is 400 years old. Surely there is a statute of limitations on such claims." Zealous made a sound that might have been laughter. "There is no statute of limitations on debt in galactic law. The humans are young and ignorant of our ways. Perhaps they can be forgiven for not understanding." "I understand perfectly," Diane replied, keeping her voice steady despite the insult. "What I do not understand is why the Larathi are so interested in 47 refugees from a dying species. The Cathari have nothing. They are nobody. What could they possibly offer the mighty Larathi hegemony?" The question hung in the air. Zealous' yellow eyes narrowed, but he did not answer. Back on Port Meadow, Vethsora sat with Laura and Governor Santos in the small office that served as the colony's administrative center. His face was drawn with exhaustion and fear, but his voice was steady as he explained the truth. 400 years ago, the Cathari faced extinction from a terrible famine, he said. The Lorathi offered help, and we were desperate enough to accept. The terms they demanded were harsh, but we had no choice. We agreed to provide them with certain services in exchange for their aid. What services? Me asked. Labor, mostly. Many of our people worked in Lorathi factories and mines for generations. But we paid that debt off long ago through our service. The Lorathi know this. The original records prove it. Laura leaned forward. Then why are they claiming you still owe them? Vethsora was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because of what we know, the Cathari were once great botanists and geneticists. We developed medicines and crops that fed half the galaxy. Most of that knowledge was lost when our empire fell, but some of it survives in the memories of our elders. What kind of knowledge? There is a plant called the Solari flower. It only grew on our homeworld, and it has been extinct for 300 years. But the genetic code for that plant still exists in the minds of our eldest members, passed down through generations of memory keepers. The Solari flower could cure diseases that no other medicine can touch. It could extend life, heal wounds, restore damaged organs. If the Lorathi could extract that knowledge from us, it would be worth billions of credits. Maybe trillions. Mia closed her eyes. So this is not about debt at all. It is about greed. Yes, Vethsora said. They want to own us so they can own what we know. And if they take us, they will not stop until they have torn every secret from our minds. On Consensus Prime, Ambassador Crawford received this information through a secure channel from Port Meadow. She studied it carefully and then made a decision that would change the course of human history. She requested an emergency session of the Assembly. The representative of humanity has the floor, the presiding judge announced. Diane stood in the center of the great chamber, feeling smaller than ever, but refusing to let it show. I wish to announce that the government of humanity has made a formal decision regarding the Cathari refugees. As of this moment, they are declared protected persons under human law. Any claim against them is a claim against humanity itself. The chamber erupted in noise. Species that had barely noticed humans before were suddenly paying attention. Zealous rose from his seat, his yellow eyes blazing with anger. This is meaningless, he declared. Human law has no standing in galactic affairs. You are a minor species with no power and no influence. You cannot protect the Cathari from a legitimate debt claim. Perhaps not, Diane admitted, but we can make it very expensive for you to try. The Lorathi hegemony depends on trade with dozens of species, including humanity. If you pursue this claim, humanity will sever all economic ties with the hegemony. We will encourage every species we trade with to do the same. Zealous laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in the sound. You would destroy your own economy to protect 47 worthless refugees. We would, Diane said simply, because they are not worthless to us. 60 years ago, the Cathari saved 3,000 humans when they had no reason to do so. They asked nothing in return. Now, it is our turn to stand for them. The chamber fell silent. Many of the assembled species were confused. Economic suicide for a handful of refugees made no sense to them. But a few of the older representatives were watching with something that looked almost like respect. Councillor Preth, a neutral observer from a species known for their fairness, rose to speak. I find this situation troubling. The human representative raises valid questions about the legitimacy of the Lorathi claim. I propose that we delay any ruling until a full investigation of the original debt records can be conducted." Zelos protested loudly, but other species began to support Preth's proposal. The investigation was approved, and the 30-day deadline was extended indefinitely. As the session ended, Diane received a message from Governor Santos. She read it and smiled for the first time in days. "What is it?" asked her aide. "Word has spread through human space about what is happening," Diane said. "The colonies are responding. Ships are being prepared. Supplies are being gathered. Our people are coming to stand with the Cathari." "How many ships?" Diane looked at the message again, hardly believing the number she saw. "So far, 300 and counting. And more are joining every hour." Back on Port Meadow, Silith found Danny Cole sitting by the edge of a pond, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She sat down beside him, and they were quiet together for a long time. "Why are your people doing this?" she finally asked. "The Larathi are powerful. They could hurt you badly. Why risk so much for us?" Danny thought about the question for a while before answering. "When I was a kid, I got lost in the woods near my home. I was scared and cold and hungry, and I thought I was going to die out there. Then a stranger found me. He carried me on his back for miles until we reached safety. I never saw him again, but I never forgot him either. He did not know me, but he helped me anyway." "That is a nice story," Scylla said, "but it does not explain why your whole species would fight for mine." "It does, though," Danny said. "That is who we are. When someone helps us in our darkest moment, we remember. We carry it with us forever. And when we have a chance to be that stranger for someone else, we take it. That is what makes us human." Silith looked at the sunset and felt the strange warmth of hope beginning to grow in her chest again. Maybe the galaxy was not as cold and empty as she had been taught to believe. Maybe there was still room for kindness among the stars. Port Meadow was not a large colony or a wealthy one. It sat on a green world at the edge of human space, far from the busy trade routes and the attention of the powerful species that dominated the galaxy. The people who lived there were farmers and craftsmen, teachers and doctors, ordinary folks who had come looking for a quiet life among the stars. But Port Meadow had one thing that made it special. It had a tradition of opening its doors to those who had nowhere else to go. Governor Mia Santos stood at the landing pad and watched the wanderer descend through the afternoon clouds. She was a small woman with silver hair and warm brown eyes that had seen more than their share of hardship. 50 years ago, she had been a refugee herself, a frightened child fleeing the chaos of Earth's final evacuation. She knew what it felt like to arrive somewhere new with nothing but the clothes on your back and hope in your heart. The ship touched down with a gentle thump, and the cargo ramp lowered slowly. Mia watched as Captain Laura Bennett emerged first, followed by her young first officer. Behind them came the Cathari. Mia had never seen a Cathari before. She had read about them in old history files, but reading was not the same as seeing. They were beautiful in a strange and sad way, with their pale blue skin and their dark eyes full of ancient sorrow. They moved hesitantly down the ramp, looking around at the green fields and the blue sky as if they had forgotten such things existed. "Governor Santos," Laura said as she approached. "Thank you for agreeing to take them." "There was never any question," Mia replied. She stepped past Laura and walked toward the elderly Cathari at the front of the group. "You must be Elder Vethsora. Welcome to Port Meadow. You and your people are safe here." Vethsora bowed his head in a gesture of respect. "We are grateful, Governor. We will not be a burden. We will work. We will contribute. We ask only for a chance. You do not need to earn your place here," Mia said gently. "You are our guests. Rest first. Work can come later." The refugees were taken to a row of small houses near the edge of town. They were simple buildings but they had clean beds and running water and kitchens stocked with food. Volunteers from the colony came to help them settle in, bringing extra blankets and clothes and toys for the children. Dr. Kevin Park was the colony's only physician, a young man who had graduated from medical school just 3 years ago. He had never treated an alien patient before, but he was determined to learn. He spent the first night sitting with Vethsora, studying Cathari anatomy from old files while the elder explained the basics of his people's biology. "Your dedication is remarkable," Vethsora said as Kevin examined one of the injured refugees. "You know nothing about us, yet you work through the night to help us." "That is what doctors do," Kevin said simply. "We help people who are hurt. It does not matter where they come from." Vethsora watched him work with something like wonder in his dark eyes. Among the elder species of the galaxy, kindness is rare. Everything is transaction. Everything is exchange. I had forgotten that generosity without expectation could exist. In another part of the refugee housing, a young Cathari named Silith was having trouble sleeping. She was barely an adolescent by her people's standards, old enough to understand that her world had ended, but young enough to still hope for something better. She crept out of the house where her family was staying and wandered into the colony's central square. The square was quiet at this late hour, but not empty. A group of human children were playing some kind of game with a ball, laughing and shouting under the glow of the streetlights. They stopped when they saw Silith standing at the edge of the square, watching them with her large dark eyes. For a moment, no one moved. Then a little girl with red hair and freckles walked over to Silith and smiled. "Hi, I am Amy. Do you want to play with us?" Silith did not understand. In Cathari culture, children did not play with strangers. There were rules and protocols, formal introductions that had to be made. You did not simply invite an outsider into your games. "I do not know how to play your game," Silith said carefully. "That is okay. We can teach you. It is easy. You just try to catch the ball and throw it to someone else. Come on." Amy grabbed Silith's hand and pulled her toward the other children. Silith was too surprised to resist. Before she knew what was happening, she was standing in a circle with 5 human children, and a boy named Peter was throwing the ball to her. She caught it clumsily. The children cheered. "Good catch," Peter said. "Now throw it to Amy." Silith threw the ball. It went wide, but Amy ran to catch it anyway, laughing as she dove to grab it before it hit the ground. The other children laughed too, and Silith felt something strange happening inside her chest. It took her a moment to recognize the feeling. It was joy. The next morning, Governor Santos called a town meeting. The people of Port Meadow gathered in the community hall to discuss the situation. Not everyone was happy about the refugees. "We barely have enough resources for ourselves," said a farmer named George. "How are we supposed to feed 47 more mouths?" "We will manage," Mia replied. "We always do. But why should we?" George pressed. "These are aliens. They are not our responsibility." An older woman named Clara stood up. She had been one of the first settlers on Port Meadow, and everyone respected her opinion. "I remember when this colony was founded," she said. "Half of us were refugees from Earth. We had nothing. Other colonies could have turned us away, but they did not. They shared what they had because that is what decent people do. Now it is our turn to do the same." The debate went on for another hour, but in the end, the vote was not even close. Port Meadow would shelter the Cathari refugees for as long as they needed. Word of the situation spread quickly through human communication networks. Other colonies began sending supplies. A ship arrived from New Kansas carrying extra medicine. Another came from Haven with seeds and farming equipment. Messages of support poured in from across human space. Vethsora watched all of this with growing amazement. He had lived for over 100 years and he had seen many things in that time. He had seen the fall of the Cathari Empire and the scattering of his people across the galaxy. He had watched as one by one, the other species turned their backs on the Cathari, deciding that a dying race was not worth their attention. But the humans were different. The humans remembered a kindness from 60 years ago, and they were repaying it with interest. "I do not understand your people," Vethsora said to Lara on the day she was preparing to leave with her ship. "You gain nothing from helping us. In galactic terms, we are worthless. Yet you treat us as if we matter." "You do matter," Lara said. "Every life matters. And besides, we are not doing this to gain something. We are doing it because it is right." Before Vethsora could respond, a message arrived from the Galactic Assembly. Governor Santos read it with a frown that deepened into fear. "What is wrong?" Lara asked. Mia looked up from the screen, her face pale. "The Lorathi hegemony has filed a claim on the Cathari refugees. They say the Cathari owe them an ancient debt, and they are demanding that we surrender them within 30 standard days." The warmth that had filled the colony seemed to drain away in an instant. Vethsora closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were filled with the old despair that Lara had seen when she first found him drifting in space. "The Lorathi," he whispered. "They have found us at last." The cargo ship Wanderer drifted through the empty space between stars, carrying medicine and grain to the struggling colony of New Kansas. Captain Lara Bennett sat in her command chair and watched the stars through the forward window. She was 42 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and tired lines around her eyes. 20 years of hauling cargo across human space had taught her that the universe was mostly empty and mostly quiet. She liked it that way. Her first officer, Danny Cole, was young and eager, barely 25, with the kind of optimism that Lara had lost somewhere along the way. He sat at the sensor station and watched the screens with the attention of someone who still believed that something exciting might happen at any moment. "Captain, I am picking up something strange," Danny said. His voice carried a note of confusion that made Lara sit up straighter in her chair. "Define strange," she said. "It is a distress signal, but the frequency is old. Really old. I have never seen anything like it in the standard databases." Lara walked over to his station and looked at the readings. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the signal pattern. She had not seen it in person before, but she knew it from the stories her grandmother used to tell her when she was a little girl sitting on the old woman's knee back on Earth. "That is a Cathari emergency beacon," Lara said quietly. Danny looked up at her with confusion on his face. "Cathari? I have never heard of them. Most people have not. They are a dying species now. Their empire fell apart about 200 years ago, and they have been scattered across the galaxy ever since. There are not many of them left. So why do you know their distress frequency?" Lara was quiet for a moment. The memory of her grandmother's voice filled her mind, telling the story of the colony ship Horizon and the desperate days when everyone aboard thought they were going to die in the cold darkness between stars. "Because they saved us once," Lara said. 60 years ago, the colony ship Horizon got lost in dead space. Navigation failure. They were drifting with no fuel and no food, and no one was coming to help them. My grandmother was on that ship. She was just a teenager then." Danny listened with growing interest as Lara continued. "A Cathari trade vessel found them by accident. The Cathari could have just passed by. They had no reason to help. Humans were nobody back then. We had nothing to offer and nothing to trade. But the Cathari captain ordered his crew to share their fuel and their food. They gave the Horizon navigation data to reach the nearest human colony. They saved 3,000 lives and asked for nothing in return." "That is a nice story," Danny said, "but that was 60 years ago. What does it have to do with us now?" Laura looked at the distress signal still blinking on the screen. It has everything to do with us. Set a course to intercept that signal. Danny hesitated. Captain, we have a schedule to keep. New Kansas is waiting for this medicine. People are sick. New Kansas can wait another few hours. Those people out there are in trouble right now. The young officer looked like he wanted to argue more, but something in Laura's expression stopped him. He nodded and began plotting the new course. It took them 4 hours to reach the source of the signal. What they found was a small vessel, barely larger than a shuttle, drifting without power near a dead moon. The ship was old and battered, with scorch marks on its hull that told a story of violence and escape. I am reading life signs, Danny said. 47 of them. They are weak but alive. Laura opened the communication channel. Kadari vessel, this is the human cargo ship Wanderer. We received your distress signal. Do you require assistance? There was a long pause before the response came. The voice that answered was thin and tired, speaking in accented but clear human language. Human vessel? This is Elder Vethsora of the Cathari refugee group. We are grateful for your response, but we have nothing to offer you in trade for your help. Our supplies are gone. Our fuel is spent. We have only ourselves, and we are worth nothing to anyone. The despair in that voice hit Laura like a physical blow. She had heard hopelessness before, but never quite like this. This was the sound of someone who had given up expecting kindness from the universe. Elder Vethsora, we are not looking for trade. We are here to help. Prepare for docking. We will bring you aboard and share what we have. Another long pause. When Vethsora spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Why would you do this? You do not know us. You owe us nothing. Laura smiled even though he could not see her. Actually, we owe you everything. 60 years ago, a Cathari vessel found a human ship called the Horizon lost in dead space. Your people saved 3,000 humans and asked for nothing in return. My grandmother was one of them. She told me that story every night when I was a child. She made me promise that if I ever had the chance to repay that kindness, I would not hesitate. The silence that followed was so long that Laura thought the communication had failed. When Vethsora finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You remember that? After 60 years, you still remember? We remember, Laura said. Humans never forget those who helped them. The docking procedure took another hour. Laura and Danny waited at the airlock with blankets and water and emergency rations. When the door finally opened, Laura got her first look at the Cathari. They were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow. Their clothes were torn and dirty. Many of them had injuries that had been poorly treated. Children clung to their parents with fear in their eyes. At the front of the group stood an elderly Cathari who must have been Vethsora. He was shorter than the others and walked with a slight limp. When he saw Laura, he stopped and stared at her with an expression she could not read. You are the captain? He asked. I am. Welcome aboard the Wanderer. You are safe now. Vethsora looked at the blankets in her hands and the water bottles Danny was already distributing to the refugees. His large dark eyes grew wet with tears that he did not try to hide. We fled from pirates who destroyed our outpost, he said. We have been drifting for 11 days. We thought we were going to die out here, alone and forgotten. No one else answered our signal. No one else came. Laura handed him a blanket and guided him gently toward the ship's common area. You are not alone anymore. We are going to take you somewhere safe. There is a human colony called Port Meadow that accepts refugees. They will give you shelter and food and time to rest. But why? Vethsora asked again. The question seemed to torment him. We are nothing. We have nothing. The galaxy has forgotten the Cathari. Why would humans remember a kindness from 60 years ago when everyone else has forgotten we exist? Laura thought about her grandmother, who had died 10 years ago with stories of the stars still on her lips. She thought about the horizon and the 3,000 people who had lived because strangers chose to be kind. Because that is who we are, she said. When someone helps us in our darkest moment, we carry that with us forever. We teach our children, and they teach their children. The kindness your people showed us 60 years ago has been passed down through generations. And now it is our turn to pass it forward. Vatsora said nothing more. He simply lowered his head and let the tears fall as Laura led him to safety.